Hey guys, Eneth here. In the last video, we built up a world that we could see a story taking place in. Today, we're going to be talking about actually figuring out what story to tell in that world. When it comes down to it, choosing which story to tell in your world can be roughly split into two parts. The first is coming up with a core idea for your plot, and the second is figuring out how you want to tell that story. These things are obviously connected, but today we'll be focusing on how to come up with a core idea for your plot. Of course, it's possible you already have some ideas. Despite this, it's almost always worth considering some other options. At the very least, you'll learn more about your story and the setting it takes place in, which can only help. With that said, let's get going. The first step is to take a look at the world that we've already made and isolate the parts that we think are the most interesting, at least at first glance. We're going to be continuing to use Leviathans as an example, and building off of what we've done in previous videos, there's a few different things that jump out at me. The first is the idea that magic effectively replaces technology. The second is the techno-mages, or in other words, the people who fix the technology that everybody uses. The third is the traditional magic users. The fourth are the ancient ruins. And the fifth is the adventurers. Now that we have this sort of short list, we can move on to the second step, which is to consider what makes these things interesting. Our primary goal here is to find out whether the things we think are interesting can serve as the focus for our story. We're going to want to stay away from anything too specific. We're not worried about any characters or plot points yet. So, let's start with the idea that magic replaces technology. There's a ton of consequences to this. Things that wouldn't be possible in our world are made possible because magic isn't limited in the same way as something like electricity. At least, not in our setting. Still, I don't think that this can serve as the focus for the story. It's more like an accent to other elements. An important part of the world, certainly, but not so much a good story by itself. Next is the technomages. As a people who fix the magic technology, they're extremely important in the setting. An interesting thing here is that even though they know how to fix things, they can't make them. Exploring why that's the case might make for a pretty good story. Let's give this one a tentative thumbs up for now. Now, the traditional magic users. This is another topic that's potentially really cool. In my mind, whether this would be interesting or not depends almost entirely on how magic actually works in the setting and on what a magic user character would do. It might be fun, of course, to follow a magic user through their training. I mean, after all, Harry Potter exists, and that's primarily based on that premise. The question here is, if they stay in their school, do they interact enough with the other components in the world that we like? This is solvable, but for now, let's leave this at another tentative yes. What about the ancient ruins, then? Well, this feels a lot like the magic technology that we've already talked about. I can think of maybe one way to tell a cool story here, but I'm not sure it would result in an entire novel. And I don't think it would explore enough of the rest of the setting to be worth it. This is another choice that we're going to discard for now. Finally, let's look at the adventurers. This has a lot of potential. The adventurers explore the world, which gives us a lot of opportunity for interacting with different factions, characters, and places. They go into the ruins, which could be really exciting, and furthermore, it feels like they could tie into everything else that's on this list, which is a really nice point. Now that we've got these things in our minds, we can move on to the third step. This is where we'll actually pick what to focus on. Remember that we're not looking at individual characters or anything like that just yet. We're just trying to figure out what would make a good story. Don't worry too much about this step. Nothing is set in stone, and if you change your mind later, it's really not a problem. Also keep in mind that you don't have to start your story at the focus. You can always start it somewhere else and go towards it. So this is, again, just sort of the core element of the story. With the things that we've looked at, I think that the natural choice here would be to focus on a group of adventurers. The more I think about it, the more this feels right. There's lots of chances to find cool places and do fun things. There's danger, excitement, and tension inherent in what they would be doing in the setting. This is pretty good because it means that we won't have to work too hard to make things interesting for the reader. Furthermore, we'll have lots of different character options. As we've talked about, groups of adventurers come from all walks of life. Even technomages or magic users can be adventurers. This is good because it means that even if we focus on a group of adventurers, we'll be able to talk about the way magic and technology works in this setting and how they interact. Well, that's mostly step 3. We've already decided then on what it is that we want to focus on. So we're going to move on to the 4th step, which is building around this focus. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, admittedly, and there's no way I can cover all of them. With that said, I'm going to go over a few ideas. We can start, for example, by thinking about what characters would fit into our story. Maybe a grizzled veteran adventurer, a technomage who just wants to make a name for themselves and stand out, or an alchemist searching for a fabled ingredient as they explore and go on these delves into ancient ruins. These are pretty interesting characters, I think, and if you work on them a little bit, or if we work on them a little bit, we can find some interesting points that can drive a story. We can also, for example, think about an objective for our characters, or some important events that are happening around the world that they might interact with. The major purpose of this step is to run with our core concept for a bit and see what we can come up with. So don't be afraid to go crazy and see what happens. Just be careful to make sure that things actually tie into the primary focus. Keeping things coherent here is really important because it means things will be much simpler later on. Once we've done this and decided that this in fact is the idea that we want to continue working on, we move on to figuring out what kind of story we want to tell. Our rough idea for a story topic and maybe characters is important, but it doesn't do too much for us by itself. There's lots of different ways to approach the same topic since they're usually pretty broad. Here, for example, do we want to tell a romance with a group of adventurers exploring as the backdrop? Do we want to go more into the horror direction and tell a story about a group that's lost in an endless set of labyrinthine ruins? Or do we want to tell a more standard adventure story where our characters explore hidden places and find ancient artifacts? There's lots of different options going forward. We'll be talking about those options and how to choose among them, as well as what goes into them, or even how to put them together to make new, cooler ideas in the next video. For now, I hope you enjoyed, and have a nice one, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the little bell so you know when I release a new video. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and if you want to know more about my writing, there's a link to my websites in the description. Talk to you next time.